Welcome into Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. Hashtag no stopping you. A happy Monday morning to everyone. Hope you had a great weekend and we're back at it again. I'm getting used to this Monday through Friday thing, but not for too much longer because baseball is set to begin, we believe, in 11 days, actually 10 days from now, with the kickoff of the season. I think that's Nationals and Yankees, and then the Royals begin July 24th. But this podcast will continue pretty much 9 o'clock every day, occasionally moving it here and there with a conflict. But I like that 9 a.m. slot because still means even if we have a day game that I can get rolling. Um, One of the crazy things, we all know this about virtual, is you can go from one thing to the next to the next. And that's kind of the world we're living in right now. And so I've got a speech coming up in a little bit virtually after the podcast. But first, I want to delve into a topic and a guy that I've gotten to know just a little bit, and um, originally maybe briefly in person, and now virtually. And I already told him I would make the joke about, hey, let's talk insurance, but it's more exciting than that. And I always hate to say that. David Voorhees joins me right now, and he's made a recent move himself. He's the chief executive officer at True Captive Insurance. I joke because, insurance is one of those things that most of us, really all of us, need, depending on what it is, and we don't understand it at all, many of us, and we spend countless hours on the phone. I'm speaking for my wife now. She deals with all that stuff, searching for answers that then get, on and on and on. But bottom line is the insurance experience is not often a good one for people. And here you are starting something new. You have a medical background in your family too. So let's begin with that. Tell me about your move in November of last year.
So, first, thank you for having me on this morning. I'm
Great to have
excited
you.
to talk through it. I've spent the majority of my career in HR and operations. So I've worked in the businesses that we're now serving. And it was always the piece that interested me the most is maybe healthcare insurance isn't the thing that you come to a job for or you focus on, but it certainly is one of the things that you absolutely need to know is there and you rely on. And as I moved from company to company and kind of got the nickname as the fixer that I would go from company to company, I realized I could do this for more folks. And that's where True Captive Insurance came from is we can now do this for hundreds and thousands of companies versus just one that I'm operating in.
Yeah, and so it's a way to make a huge impact. Obviously, I love the nickname the Fixer, by the way. Nobody gets that name unless they're, out of Pulp Fiction or something uh, like that. No, that was the Wolf, but he was the Fixer, right? I mean, he was that was the Harvey Keitel character. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but that's what I think about a little bit. But look, I mean, this is a great point because again, we're talking about, an industry that is often so confusing, and you're coming at it from a different end, which I think is so important because you understand what they're going through and you've been on that other side. So what was the transition like for you? And then tell me about True Captive and what you guys are doing, and we'll get into the future of this and where it's going, because I think you can tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, this is, to me, in many ways, a topic of disruption.
Absolutely. So if I think way back, this starts with my grandfather, Army physician. He came out of World War II and he started his private practice in Leavenworth, Kansas. And so as a young boy, back when healthcare was personal and insurance wasn't complicated, I would go on house calls. I mean, the leather bag, the stethoscope. He had the little cross pen, and I would just tag along, and we'd be there for an hour, 2 hours sometimes, just meeting with the families and getting to hear about all this. So that really stuck with me. And as I grew up, my father, vascular-thoracic surgeon, he came at healthcare a little bit differently, but still, he would, and I remember very vividly, would run into situations where he felt the standard of care was different than what the insurance provider would pay, and he would do some of those cases pro bono. And so this was what my viewpoint was growing up. And as I got into HR and got to talk with a lot of people and what was most important to them, That's how we started to think about how can we do this a little bit differently. Insurance gets a bad name, and some of it's rightly so, right? You get bad names for bad things, and we want to approach it slightly differently, where we're going to wrap our insurance around your company and your employees. So versus you wrapping yourself around the things we're going to offer you, we're going to sit there, partner with you, and talk about how can we make this truly personal and uncomplicated, because a lot of those terms went right over my head when I first started this. And I realized that I was quiet in the beginning. I probably should have asked more questions. But what if we sat down? What if we decoded some of the terminology that when you understand it, it makes sense? But in the beginning, because you didn't grow up in it, you don't get it. So we really just want to approach it from a personal perspective and take me back to my roots where, my grandfather spent time with people and just wanted to learn what made them tick and how he could make them healthy.
Well, this so much reminds me of a conversation I've had many times with different doctors, like my friend Dr. Allison Edwards, who's been a guest on this show and my weekly audio podcast multiple times, and in part because I've been able to utilize her expertise in terms of the pandemic and getting that field, but with direct primary care, and that's certainly something that is emerging. It's giving patients and doctors a different and an alternative to be able to go subscription based. And I bring that up because it's always been, not always, but it feels like it's always been in our lifetime. This is the way it is. This is what you do, whether you're an individual or a company or big company. This is what it is. This is what we do. It's it's that old line of, well, this is the way we've always done things.
Right.
Which, anytime you find yourself saying that, I've said this before on this show, but one of the one of the great expressions or quotes that I have heard in my few years of podcasting has been from Jeff Jones, the CEO of H&R Block, who said there's a slippery slope between tradition and irrelevance. And there comes a certain point where you move on to something new. I don't know if we're generations away from the traditional model of insurance changing, or if we're on the doorstep of that. But how cutting edge is this, and how hard is it to change something that has been this way for so long?
I think we're on the doorstep. I've had a lot of really productive conversations with some of the large carriers, and there's a lot of focus in how can we do things differently. Now, the bigger you are, the harder it is to change. But the fact that they're willing to think about changing, to me, is a positive. And when you think about insurance, so captives, we decided to be very upfront with what we do. So there are a lot of captive partners out there, a lot of really good captive partners out there. We just put it in our name because we want you to know what we are. And captive is really an alternative to traditional self-funded insurance. So we operate very similarly to some of those. However, again, it's the customization. It's the ability to think about how do we do this a little bit differently. And we talk about the cliches, and we talk about the things that, the way we've always done it. And really the way that we should operate is working all together. One operator in this situation in healthcare is not going to be able to do it alone. You've got your providers. You were talking about the doctors. They're critical. They're on the front lines. They're the ones actually handling the patient care. But in many times, they know very little about what's going on in the back office because that's not their area of expertise.
Sure.
They hire great employees that can help them do that, who then interact with the insurance carriers. There's usually a third-party administrator in the middle that's adjudicating claims, or they're just processing claims, understanding should they be paid. But really, I think we're very close to a fundamental shift in how people are consuming healthcare, and we just need to take the time to listen. And not everything that people will share are going to be transformative and help us do something different. But if we're listening, these things that are small that would be very meaningful can make and pave great ways for us to fundamentally shape healthcare in a much better fashion than it is today.
So let's talk about that in your role as listener, which, by the way, we all can do a better job of that. And the best ones, the best leaders out there are phenomenal leaders. We can talk a little more about leadership, but what do you hear? What do you hear from people when you're asking those questions and when you're learning?
Well, the first thing is I don't understand it. I don't get it. Something simple as a deductible. Like, I don't understand what a deductible is versus an out-of-pocket max. I don't know if I can go in network or out of network. Is the lab inside the hospital in network? Is the imaging center in the hospital in network? And so it's really just a fundamental misunderstanding of all the things that are available to us to stay healthy. There's well care, which is ongoing maintenance that you need to do every year,
Mhm.
and then there's care that you need in real time when something's an emergent situation. And when you add these different levers, the ability to think is totally different. But mainly, it's a complete misunderstanding of how things work, or just a lack of understanding. So sitting down and spending an hour just talking about some of the basic definitions of healthcare is critical. But then taking that a step further is, how can you be a consumer? When you go buy a TV at a store, you don't go into Best Buy and just say, give me a
Mhm.
TV. You don't go to Amazon, type in TV, and select the first TV that you get. You want to look at size. You want to look at definition. You want to look at, is it upgradable? Does it have internet? Does it have Dolby? I mean, there's all these different things. Healthcare is the exact same way, except we go in and we say, I need an MRI. And they go, okay, MRI, without thinking of it any differently. So consuming healthcare in the way we consume other ways will not only help you be a more savvy consumer and cost effective, but a healthier person. When you're getting care that you understand and you feel good and you can bolt onto it and say, "This is, I believe in this, I understand it," the chances of you being healthier and happier are far greater.
Well, and I think so many of us, and I would imagine that that's true at the company level too, say, well, to what you're saying, David. Okay, I need that MRI. Okay, where do I go? Versus, okay, what's the best option? What does it cost? What are my options? Right? There's no shopping going on because we've all been beat down for so long of not being able to get answers or having to get on the phone and wait for an hour or whatever it is. I just wonder too if, and I always love the example of, there's a couple examples in terms of disruption, cab companies versus Uber. Um, any of the streaming services, take Netflix versus what used to exist, Blockbuster, right? And it's pretty easy to sit where you're at up on top until things change. And so, you know, I, I'm curious how much overall the industry is going to change. With what you guys are doing and others, with True Captive, how big of an impact can that have, and how quickly can it have that? How much are you throwing the ball back in the big boys' court, so to speak? Because look, they're they like where they're at right now, I assume.
Yeah, the funny part about captives or any alternative funding is we all use the same networks that the large carriers use. And this is where I talk about us working together. It's not me against them or us against them. We really need to work together because not everybody's a fit for an alternative funding solution. Not everybody's a fit for a full and insured solution. But we still all use the same network. So those carriers have built great networks to the doctors that you know and trust. Working with True Captive, you keep the same doctor in the same network, and that's where some people start thinking, well, if I move away from a Blue Cross or a Cigna or an Aetna or a United, I'm going to have less access to care. You actually have the same exact network that you did before. We're using their networks, and we partner with them. And I want to make sure that the companies that we work with are a good fit for the type of solution we're providing. So if we're offering relief to a company, we're not offering a relief just to the company, we're offering it to the employees. Because if we can help you save 30 to 50% over a fully insured contract over 5 years, with the right company and the right people running it, wanting to give that back to their people, that's meaningful. I'll never forget, I worked in a real estate company years ago, running their healthcare operation. And I spoke to a gentleman who did labor in a Texas apartment complex that they owned. And he called me and said, David, I can't afford $800 and $900 for my family to have health care. I make $10 an hour. And I just stopped. I mean, I didn't have a really good answer other than thank you for sharing that with me. And I went to work. I'm relentless. I mean, that's the thing is when there's something that isn't working, when somebody is having an issue, I'm relentless. I want to figure it out. I want to help. And I may not be able to solve, for X that is the fundamental giant problem. But if we can incrementally solve some of these issues together, we can make it better for the people that consume our insurance. And that goes for the same thing with the big boys, down to the alternative funding platforms. We all just need to listen to the people that are using our products and need them, and we can do it together.
Well, my friend Kiana Singh says, I know insurance processing for us young folks is so confusing. Guess what? It's confusing for us old folks too. So we can we can all speak to that one. But I love what you're saying there too. I mean, you obviously have this passion to go in and figure something out, and it's a really interesting, that story really to me is so representative of society, because if you are underserved, I mean, this is a much deeper discussion too when you start talking about why are minorities um, testing more positive or having more positives in terms of COVID. It's not because of the color of skin or because they're more prone to it. It's because the access that they have to healthcare, to insurance, to all of those things. To have to work these jobs that hey, I got to show up and get this paycheck, and so it all funnels into so much of what you're talking about. That person that said, "Look, I can't afford that insurance. What do I do? Can't afford that insurance, and there's a pretty good chance you're not going to the doctor because that visit's going to cost so much." I mean, this is overall. I know I'm digging deeper here. This is a greater problem, which I think and hope feeds into what you're talking about in terms of solving this crisis.
Yeah, I may sound like a broken record. It goes back to listening
Yeah,
to the customers, listening to the consumers. And when healthcare was originally born, it wasn't necessarily designed to be confusing. I mean, I don't think it was its intention to become this multi-trillion-dollar industry that just continues to, it's just a big cog. But the reality is, making some of these minor changes, they can be incredibly meaningful for everyone. That goes from the underserved to folks that are at the company. I work for a company, and this isn't new, but when you look at premiums, if they're all the same, that may not make the most sense for everybody in the company. So that goes from your executive branch down to your front line. If you're all paying the same for the insurance, that may not make sense for your group. So one of the companies I worked for said, we're going to tier your premiums based on your income. So the lower income that you made, your premiums were lower. Yet the higher income earners would pay more in premium. And this was a great solution, although when it was introduced was radical. And some people didn't like it, just like anything else that's new, but it was incredibly meaningful. And as we kept progressing, we realized that it was something that was very advantageous for everyone. And I'm not saying that that's right for every company. So I hope people listening don't think, oh, we need to do this immediately. The
sure.
key is to sit down and say, what makes sense for our group? I mean, in our plans, if you really wanted to put baby wipes in the plan, we can put baby wipes in the plan. I joke about that. I have a young son at home, so baby wipes are something that it has been a part of my last couple years.
Right.
But it's just about listening and then thinking about innovation and disruption and challenging some of the status quo. And some of the status quo is there for a reason, but that doesn't mean that it never can be challenged. It doesn't mean that small, meaningful changes can't be incredibly impactful for your population and the people we serve.
All right, I want to shift gears a little bit, and certainly a discussion about leadership, but also just about, and this in many ways falls to what you're talking about, changing times. It's a different discussion, but the reality of it is, and it's the reason why I started this podcast, and here we are now on episode 81, that everyone's lives have changed in these last 4 months. I mean, I sit back there and I would challenge everybody to do this exercise. Just think about what your life looked like late March, early April. There's no one that it's the same. And I know the world changes day by day, but I don't remember ever looking back at something 4 months previous without, thank God, a major life changing event in terms of um, the health of my wife and kids and family. We've been very fortunate in terms of that. Yet our lives completely changed just like everyone else's. So here you are, what, 4 months or so into starting this, this new job and running this company, and that in itself, I can only imagine, was a life altering experience. And look, there are a lot of people out there that happen to make similar pivots or certain pivots in their own lives, or maybe they were starting up a new company or a restaurant or whatever it is, and just like that, they were deemed unessential and maybe had to shut those doors on those dreams. What was March like for you when this all came around?
Well, I used to work for a global company, and so we were dealing with this early in December and January, and like many Americans, we weren't sure that it was going to come here, but sure enough, it did, and now we're dealing with it. So I had a few more months to prepare myself, but it still wasn't enough to prepare. And unfortunately, and I think many people would agree with this, is no matter where you are on the fence of how severe this is or what you should be doing, we really don't know. And the information that we're getting isn't necessarily something that we can all agree to.
Mhm.
And that's unfortunate. So as I'm thinking about this in March and getting ready to gear up to this, definitely there were some things that I had to deal with internally. There was a big four-letter word that started with fear, or started with F, and it was fear. And I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what the next few months would hold for True Captive. But at the same time, I realized after I got over my heart palpitations of what in the world are you doing, what we're doing is much bigger than just a little bit of fear holding you back. I mean, healthcare is what's needed. I mean, we've paused on well care, we've paused on things that are not essential, but that's going to come whirring back. And we're going to need to get back into taking care of ourselves on a day-to-day basis. And so, what does that look like? And that's where we can help. We can partner with the broker community out there that are serving their customers. We can partner with the companies. We can partner with the carriers and try to figure out as we're getting back closer to the things that we knew, what we were doing and how we were doing, what that all looks like. So the key component is preparing now, even though it's in some cases chaos. We've got so many things going on that are they're having us focus here and then focus here. But we need to also think about here, because when it gets there, we won't want to be waiting to reset when it's time to go.
Yeah, and we'll never have the old normal back. We will get elements of it back. It's not like everything is going to be different, but there are elements like this, and there's so many of us, myself included, with my speaking business, and for that matter, the baseball business, of needing to be face to face. Well, guess what? I'm not going to be face to face with a baseball player this year. It's going to be via Zoom. It's going to be via text, via cell phone. We'll record via Zoom or a platform like this that I'm using for interviews. We'll make it work. I mean, that's where we're at right now. You can't stay still. If you're going to stay still and wait for this, you're going to be left behind. I truly believe that. What have you heard from some of the companies that you work with, and I can only imagine with your database and your contact list from all of your years in HR, I know you know a lot of people. And, look, if everyone's being honest, there's been fear throughout all of this. And I've found more executives willing to open up about this. What have you heard in general from just the different people you've talked to over these recent months?
Well, for insurance and healthcare, this is busy season. And what I mean by that is this is when all the renewals are starting to go through the process. And I think most companies and most people are fearing what's going to happen to my premiums. Are they going to skyrocket? Are they going to stay stable? And the preliminary results are that they're going up. And the interesting part about that is, and I mentioned this before, so there has been a load to insurance with emergent cases. Obviously those that have been affected by COVID in the severe cases are requiring a great deal of care to get through that and get healthy again. On the other side of this, all the well care and all the elective, that's paused. So think about orthopedics, knees, shoulders, hips, all paused. Going every
Mhm.
year to get your well checkup. A lot of the well care for females. I have to sit in the car when my wife has gone in because they're trying to limit the number of people that go. So all that's paused, and healthcare uses algorithms just like anything else. And so they're looking at trends and they're saying, okay, when this whirs back, what's the load gonna be? And just like any algorithm, sometimes that forecast can be right, and sometimes that forecast can be wrong. So these companies are worried that the forecast is going to be wrong, and they're going to pay an exorbitant amount of premium. And I'll also tell you that they don't get their premiums back. That doesn't
Mhm.
come back. They don't refund those. And they usually don't bring it back down and say, okay, well, we made a mistake. We budgeted here. We're here. We're going to come back. And that's one of the things about captives that always interested me is you actually are incurring claims in real time and paying them as they come. So that fancy algorithm isn't what's driving your cost. You're actually paying the claims as they come in. And if we do miss budget, so I'm always conservative. I don't ever want to come back to somebody and say, hey, we were wrong and we were off by, X thousands of dollars. But if we do say we're conservative and we've estimated this and we're basing all of our premiums on that and we haven't, guess what? Your premium gets returned. You get paid dividends when we're running really well. And so that's the kind of thinking that I think in healthcare across the board is, okay, it's a business. Yes, we have to charge a certain amount of money to stay in business, to offer this service to you, to protect you and your family. But when we're wrong and we've charged too much or we've done a little bit too much, what can we do to give that back to you? Rate holidays are a fun thing. If you've never heard about that in businesses, I encourage you to do some research on this. But if you're a self-insured customer or you're somebody who is in a captive and you've charged enough premium and you're in September and you're going, hey, we're going to be fine for the rest of the year. What if you told your company that, hey, we're not going to charge insurance for the month of December because you've budgeted enough, you've done a great job. It's the most amazing thing not to pay insurance in December. These are the things you can do in captives and alternative funding. So, the fear is there that the premiums are going to be high and they're going to have to make decisions whether they can keep healthcare or change what kind of healthcare they have, which people wouldn't see favorably.
Well, it's all interesting, and I know in terms of you've talked about listening. Let's talk briefly before we wrap it up about leadership. I know that in your LinkedIn post this morning, you said uh, talk about sports and leadership, and you said maybe pick my brain about that a little one too, because I see the Brett and the Mahomes jerseys right above you. If I didn't know, if you hadn't already told me that your wife was giving you a hard time about the one over your left shoulder that we could briefly see, we could pretend that that is something else. But I'll give you the mulligan because it is the last ever 42 worn in baseball outside of Jackie Robinson Day, one of the truly great human beings and players of our lifetime, Mariano Rivera. So you're obviously a lover of sports. I think you're a KU guy. I'm just curious your take on leadership or what you want to know because to me there is so much about everything you've talked about in sports. The Royals, I don't know how they're going to do in these 60 games or if we even get these 60 games in, fingers crossed. However, what I do know is the leadership and the communication they've had at a time where it's more needed than ever has been, I mean, truly, you're talking about over 1,200 Zoom calls, not just for the sake of doing it, you know, very specific with different minor leaguers, major leaguers, groups, scouts, on and on within the organization. They've really been the leader to me during this pandemic.
Yeah, this is what I think, and this goes for anything, but right now, leadership has to be humble. If anything is shown by all of the things that we're facing right now, there are so many unknowns, and you don't have to have the answer just because you're the leader of a team or a department or a company. You have to be humble and listen. Now, your job is to make decisions, and that's why you're in the role that you're in, but it's okay to not know. It's okay to say, I don't know the answer right now, but let's work on it together, or give me some time and let's do that. So when I think about leadership, I just think about people really focusing on the fundamentals of listening to their people and working together. That's how we do it. And I sound like a broken record sometimes with that, but I've had some great leadership around me growing up, and I've had people teach me that just because I have a fancy title or I've elevated to some area, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm still the same person. We're all the same people getting up, putting our pants on one leg at a time. So if we work on this together, likely the answer on the other end will be better than it was if I came up with it on my own. And I encourage people to give feedback, even if it's not the most positive thing. Let's be constructive with it, but give that feedback because I rather look silly in a room with people giving me good feedback than look silly and sending something out that I thought was the right idea. And someone said, I was wondering if that was going to work. Tell me before. We'll change. We'll pivot. That's really what good companies, good people do is they pivot when they need to pivot. So just be humble, listen, and be open to not having to know everything. It doesn't make you look any worse or any better. In fact, it probably makes you look like a true leader.
I love that, and it's something that I think about all the time. I think too many people are too proud or afraid that asking for help or just being curious will somehow show weakness. But the best people I've worked with, Dave Moore is a guy that asks for everyone's opinion in a leadership role. He's doing it to get some, information, some consensus, and ultimately he makes that decision. But it never comes without really talking to people and listening to their feedback. And then it's a matter of what you do with it. Simon Sinek, who is one of my favorite follows, posted this morning, true strength is the courage to ask for help. And, I've always felt like, even in my role in sports, I'm the one guy in our group or one of the only guys on TV in our group that didn't play at any kind of level that anybody would talk about. So why wouldn't I continue to pick the brains of the former athletes and ask them about different elements of baseball? Hey, am I seeing this right? Or am I right? Is this a good theory or bad theory? So that by the time I get on the air, I've listened and I've taken that in. I don't ever sit there and think, well, they're thinking I don't know what I'm talking about. No, they help me learn more. So I think that's across the board. Final question, and we'll wrap it up. If people want to learn more about True Captive or about captives, about the industry, what can they do?
Well, first you can go to truecaptive.com. That's our website. Of course, you can learn about our company and captives. You'll see that we're really trying to focus on educating people and understanding what insurance is, and so how you can make better informed decisions. I also think talking to your brokers, talk to your broker community out there and say, hey, what are these captives? What is true captive? Can we look into it and talk about it? We may not be the answer for everybody, but we're going to spend time and educate you. And I think that makes us a little bit different, that we aren't just looking for the customer. We're looking for the education and changing healthcare in a truly meaningful way. So, and if you do Google captives, I will caution you, there are about 48 million hits that you'll get if you look on captive. So truecaptive.com and talk to your brokers. More than happy to have a conversation with anyone about health insurance. I love it. I'm tickled to death that I get to wake up every day and do this for the companies that we serve and the companies in the future that we'll work together with.
Well, I love it. I'm such a fan of disruption, not just change. I'm a fan of change, and you know what? I think every day, well, we all are becoming a little bit of an older guy, but I think the older I get, the more I really try to push back at doing things the way we've always done them, right? Like the anti get off my lawn guy. Let's see how we can continue to learn. Let's see how we continue to grow. Let's see, because look, not if nothing is if nothing is the same because of this pandemic 4 months ago, you start to look back at the growth and the different ways that things change in the course of history, and I think it's pretty fun to be a part of that. I know that you're doing it. So David, appreciate the visit, appreciate all the insight and the perspective. Again, it's truecaptive.com. David is the CEO, made that move in November. I'm glad things are going well and they'll continue to grow. David, thanks so much for spending the time today.
Great. Thanks, Joel.
All right, David Voorhees, True Captive, the CEO of that organization. I love this because I love conversations like this where I get to learn and hopefully pass that on to others too. That's going to do it for another episode of Rounding the Bases Live. We're about 10, 11 days away from baseball. Again, this will stay full schedule of guests all at 9 o'clock this week. So I hope that you'll share it. Also, don't forget that my weekly audio podcast comes out Monday morning. So that the newest one was released today. Hope you will just search that, iTunes, Spotify, all those places, wherever you find podcasts, search for Rounding the Bases. And then, of course, this every single day on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, post it back on LinkedIn, Rounding the Bases Live. Thanks for watching. Hope to catch you tomorrow on Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust.